Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Get Out of Jail Free Radio Hour. I am your host and guide, Mr. Crispy, speaking to you through uncanny frequencies and sharing with you stories strange, fascinating, and terrifying. The views and opinions expressed on air are solely those of the speaker. The Get Out of Jail Free Radio Hour is an entertainment program, and any similarities to any person living or dead, or any place or events, are entirely coincidental. The Get Out of Jail Free Radio Hour was created except as indicated by Non-Henshaw. Listener discretion is advised. And now, take Mr. Crispy's moldering hand in yours, ignore that tacky fluid under my nails, and join me for the Get Out of Jail Free Radio Hour. Other remote intimacies. The Cricket Man was spotted again last night outside of Herschel's Market on 3rd and Chance around 10 p.m. Their whistling could be heard as far as 2 miles away. This is the 9th appearance of the entity so far this year. Bobby Gant and Deborah Hull are still missing, presumed dead or dying in the Cricket Man's nest. Authorities are seeking any and all information regarding the whereabouts of the Cricket Man, or his phantasmal familiar, the skunk goat. Awakened by the sound of a train whistle, seemed late for a train to be driving through the night, Peter regretted that the dream of his long-dead bride Mathilda was only a dream. He laid his hand on the cold half of his too large bed and sobbed in mourning. Dawn broke over the Bountings Valley, the sun's rays casting a spell which compelled the residents to awake and begin their day. Donald was one such resident, preparing his coffee and reading the Bountings Valley Register for the latest in what was happening. His favorite section was the obituaries. They had been since he was a morbid youth. Especially gruesome deaths, or those that happened to adolescents, he would clip out and add to his scrapbook. Sometimes he would write down what he believed to be the last moments of those described as dearly beloved, seal it in an envelope, and send it to the family's care of the funeral home. "Now, class, please turn your books to page 46 and work on the algebra exercises until the bell rings," said Mr. Chansey to his math class. It was only 11:15, and he had a couple more sessions before lunch before he could revisit the fine liquor that awaited him in his desk, singing its sweet and stinging song to him. He took his seat at the desk and was startled to see at the back of the class a young girl, definitely not of the age to be in this session. He made to point at her and ask who she was, but was seized by a constriction around his throat. He tried to clear it, but all that it managed to do was create a clicking sound. His eyes bulged, and his face went shades of maroon and purple before he passed out to the delight of the class. Greg Regular had been the head mortician at Regular Funeral Home for the last 23 years. Greg had seen a lot of death in his time there, and liked the quiet of his charges. After sorting through the mail, he attended to Frank Klein, who had come to his end the previous night. Frank Klein was, unfortunately, not one of the quiet ones. When Greg began to make the incision to inject the formaldehyde, Frank's eyes shot open all black. Had Greg been more worldly, he would have recognized the sounds that Frank made as Egyptian, and had the life not been suffocated out of Greg by Frank's gnarled grip, he would have thanked Frank for this most merciful of deaths, considering the havoc and chaos that was to come. Route 18 in Trainsboro is notorious for violent car accidents. There have been accidents occurring around the waxing gibbous moon since 1963, taking the lives of hundreds of people, the elderly, the young, couples with young children, the wicked and the less wicked alike. The accidents never outright kill the victims. They report, if capable of communication, of seeing a moldering bride in a blood-stained dress hitching a ride. As they approach, her head looms larger and luminous, and her smile spreads like a virus overtaking her visage. Trainsboro residents have learned a long time ago to find alternate routes during those times when the moon isn't quite full. Floating over the rooftops, the ghost of John Chansey visits the children of the children of the children he taught in St. Thomas's parochial school a century before. While the children stir with troubled dreams, the ghost of John Chansey pries open their jaws and loosens their teeth. The children then awake cranky and teary, their breath fetid and thick with rot. They have to chew carefully for days, sometimes weeks later, until the teeth fall out, yellow and soft like old Halloween candy. Where an old and forgotten school used to stand, there now grows a pine tree forest. In winter, the trunks bend and scream with the wind, branches snapping and falling to the floor below. A coven of crones gather these to light pyres on nights where the moon shines giant in the heavens. As they chant their hymns to their goddesses, red smoke rises from the fire, forming at times the agonized faces of burning students. Sometimes one of these will step out of the fire, shadows stretching unnaturally to their left, and taking shifting non-human forms. They speak instructions to their apostles, and disappear into the spaces between the woods to watch and wait. At the local supermarket, renovations are underway. A sign reads, "Pardon our dust," and yellow caution tape prevents entry to the aisle with teas and coffees. There is a crack in the floor near soap and cleaning supplies, which has been widening now for about a week. Every morning, a blue liquid the viscosity of syrup oozes from the crack. No one knows when it bubbles to the surface, and the assistant manager could see nothing suspicious when he shone his flashlight into the gap to find the source of the liquid. Billy has been collecting the fluid in jars, which line his apartment's windowsill. They sing terrible lullabies to him. Marta Genpole, a spry 87, screamed in terror as hundreds of spiders emerged from her box of grape nuts. Authorities arrived hours later to find Marta cocooned in livid blue webs. Doctors at Drawer Psychiatric Hospital are confident that with the right cocktail of medications, Marta will stop screaming soon. The Right Reverend Carl Green stood in front of the mirror, adjusting his collar for the sacristy, as the altar boy prepared the sacred objects for service. "You can step out now, Billy. I'll be out in a minute," Carl said, and Tommy walked out, making his signs in front of the crucifix. The door closed, and out of the closet came a scratching and a squeak. "You may enter now. I am ready," said Carl. And out of the closet came the vicar. It moved on 5 legs, jointed in 4 places, and its robes were a violent shade of blue. Carl grimaced at the smell, a combination of smoke, daffodil, and snake breath. The vicar studied Carl with its 8 compound eyes, then opened its mouth to speak. Carl sensed more than heard what the vicar told him. Carl's black heart beat faster, a combination of awe, repulsion, and thrill at the message he was now ready to pass to his congregation. "Come on, Billy, tell him what happened," chided Thomas at recess. Billy shivered, and not just from the November breeze that blew by. "It was just, weird and kind of, gross," Billy said, making what happened seem like less of a big deal than it really was. "It was old man Carlson who was released from DPH," Thomas excitedly said. "I guess he was too old to worry about burning anything down." Thomas and the other boys by the slide all guffawed, but Billy was silent, staring into space beyond the playground, beyond the fence, to to the part of town he had fatefully visited on Halloween. He knocked on the weathered wooden door of the bungalow, his sack ready to receive any number of treats. The door swung open, and a man stood in front of him wearing a bright yellow suit with a matching hat. From inside the house came some 1950s-style rhythm and blues record. He held his hands behind his back. "And who are you, little man? A werewolf?" The plastic itched at Billy's face, and he said, "Trick or treat." The man's grin widened, but he kept his lips closed, seeming to draw a slightly curved line across his face. Billy saw the arms move out from behind his back, holding maybe a bag of chocolate candy bars or Smarties. The man's arms came out, and he wasn't holding treats. No, Billy couldn't exactly make out what the man had in his hands, or what exactly was on his hands. They looked scaly and angry. The man chanted loud and lustily. It made Billy feel strange, then revolted as the man rubbed his hands together, the scales catching and tearing off into flesh flakes that fell like dried snow into his treat bag. The man laughed and continued to chant, The music crescendoed with his chanting, now screaming, as more and more of the scabs fell clicking into the bag. Billy was frozen in horror and was about to run away when the scabbed man began to open his mouth in a wide smile. The last thing Billy felt was his pants becoming wet before he blacked out. Sandy the Tinker by Charlotte Riddell. Before commencing my story, I wish to state it is perfectly true in every particular. "We quite understand that," said the skeptic of our party, who was wont, in the security of friendly intercourse, to characterize all such prefaces as mere introductions to some tremendous blank, 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 which trio the reader can fill up at his own pleasure and leisure. On the occasion in question, however, we had donned our best behavior, a garment which did not sit ungracefully on some of us, and our host, who was about to draw out from the stores of memory one narrative for our entertainment, was scarcely the person before whom even Jack Hill would have cared to express his cynical and unbelieving views. We were seated, an incongruous company of 10 persons, in the best room of an old manse among the Scottish hills. Accident had thrown us together, and accident had driven us under the minister's hospitable roof. Cold, wet, and hungry, drenched with rain, sorely beaten by the wind, we had crowded through the door opened by a friendly hand, and now, wet no longer, the pangs of hunger assuaged with smoking rashers of ham, poached eggs, and steaming potatoes, we sat around a blazing fire, drinking toddy out of tumblers, whilst the two ladies who graced the assemblage partook of a modicum of the same beverage from wine glasses. Everything was eminently comfortable, but conducted upon the most correct principles. Jack could no more have taken it upon him to shock the minister's ear with some of the opinions he aired in Fleet Street than he could have asked for more whiskey with his water. "Yes, it is perfectly true," continued the minister, looking thoughtfully at the fire. "I can't explain it. I cannot even try to explain it. I will tell you the story exactly as it occurred, however, and leave you to draw your own deductions from it." None of us answered. We fell into listening attitudes instantly, and 18 eyes fixed themselves by one accord upon our host. He was an old man, but hale. The weight of 80 winters had whitened his head, but not bowed it. He seemed young as any of us, younger than Jack Hill, who was a reviewer and a newspaper hack, and whose way through life had not been altogether on easy lines. 30 years ago, upon a certain Friday morning in August, began the minister, I was sitting at breakfast in the room on the other side of the passage, where you ate your supper, when the servant girl came in with a letter. She said a laddie, all out of breath, had brought over from Dendelly Manse. He was ridden the way, she went on, and he's fairly beaten. I told her to make the messenger sit down and put food before him, and then, when she went to do my bidding, proceeded, I must confess with some curiosity, to break the seal of a missive forwarded in such hot haste. It was from the minister at Dendelly, who had been newly chosen to occupy the pulpit of his deceased father, occupied for a quarter of a century and more. The call from the congregation originated rather out of respect to the father's memory than any extraordinary liking for the son. He had been reared for the most part in England, and was somewhat distant and formal in his manners, and though full of Greek and Latin and Hebrew, wanted the true Scotch accent that goes straight to the heart of those accustomed to the broad, honest, tender Scottish tongue. His people were proud of him, but they did not just like all his ways. They could remember him a lad running about the whole countryside, and they could not understand and did not approve of his holding them at arm's length, and shutting himself up among his books and refusing their hospitality, and sending out word he was busy when maybe some very decent man wanted speech of him. I had taken upon myself to point out that I thought he was wrong, and that he would alienate his flock from him. Perhaps it was for this very reason, because I was blunt and plain, he took to me kindly, and never got on his high horse, no matter what I said to him. Well, to return to the letter. It was written in the wildest haste, and entreated me not to lose a moment in coming to him, as he was in the very greatest distress and anxiety. Let nothing delay you, he proceeded. If I cannot speak to you soon, I believe I shall go out of my senses. What could be the matter, I thought? What in all the wide world earth could have happened? I had seen him but a few days before, and he was in good health and spirits, getting on better with his people, feeling hopeful of so altering his style of preaching as to touch their hearts more sensibly. I must lay aside southern ideas as well as accent if I can, he went on, smiling. Men who live such lives of hardship and privation, who cast their seed into the ground under such rigorous skies, and cut their corn in fear and trembling at the end of late uncertain summers, who take the sheep out of the snowdrifts and carry the lambs into shelter beside their own humble hearths, must want a different sort of sermon from those who sleep softly and walk delicately. I had implied something of all this myself, and it amused me to find my own thoughts come back clothed in a different fashion, and presented to me as quite as strangers. Still, all I wanted was his good, and I felt glad he showed such aptitude to learn. What could have happened, however, puzzled me sorely. As I made my hurried preparations for setting out, I fairly perplexed myself with speculation. I went into the kitchen, where his messenger was eating some breakfast, and asked him if Mr. Cawley was ill. I dinna ken, he answered. He made no complaint, but he looked awful bad, just awful. In what way? I inquired. As if he had seen a ghaist, was the reply. This made me very uneasy, and I jumped to the conclusion the trouble was connected with money matters. Young men will be young men, and here the minister looked significantly at the callow bird of our company, a youth who had never owned a sixpence in his life or given away a cent, while Jack Hill, no chicken by the way, was over head and ears in debt, and could not keep a sovereign in his pocket, though spending or bestowing it involved going dinnerless the next day. Young men will be young men, repeated the minister in his best pulpit manner, just as though any one expected them to be young women, grumbled Jack to me afterwards. And I feared that now he was settled and comfortably off, some old creditor he had been paying as best he could might have become pressing. I knew nothing of his liabilities, or beyond the amount of the stipend paid him, the state of his pecuniary affairs, but, having once in my own life made myself responsible for a debt, I was aware of all the trouble putting your arm out further than you could draw it back involves, and I considered that most probably money, which is the root of all evil, and all good, Jack's eyes suggested to me, was the cause of my young friend's agony of mind. Blessed with a large family, every one of whom is now alive and doing well, I thank God, out in the world. You may imagine I had not much opportunity for laying by. Still, I had put aside a little for a rainy day, and that little I placed in my pocketbook, hoping even a small sum might prove of some use in case of an emergency. "Come, you are a trump," I saw written plainly on Jack Hill's face, and he settled himself to listen to the remainder of the minister's story in a manner which could not be considered other than complimentary. Duly and truly, I knew quite well, he had already devoted the first 5-guinea check he received to the poor of that minister's parish. "By the road," proceeded our host, "Dundedley is distant from here 10 long miles, but by a short cut across the hills it can be reached in something under 6. For me it was nothing of walk, and accordingly I arrived at the manse ere noon." He paused, and though 30 years had elapsed, drew a handkerchief across his forehead ere he continued his narrative. "I had to climb a steep brae to reach the front door, but ere I could breast it, my friend met me. 'Thank God you are come,' he said, pressing my hand in his. 'Oh, I am grateful.' He was trembling with excitement. His face was of a ghastly pallor. His voice was that of a person suffering from some terrible shock, laboring under some awful fear. 'What has happened, Edward?' I asked. I had known him when he was a little boy. 'I am distressed to see you in such a state. Rouse yourself. Be a man. Whatever may have gone wrong can possibly be righted. I have come over to do all that lies in my power for you. If it is a matter of money—' 'No, it is not money,' he interrupted. 'Would that it were!' And he began to tremble again so violently that he really communicated some part of his nervousness to me, and put me into a state of perfect terror. 'Whatever it is, Cawley, out with it,' I said. 'Have you murdered anybody?' 'No, it is worse than that,' he answered. 'But that's just nonsense,' I declared. 'Are you in your right mind, do you think?' 'I wish I were not,' he returned. 'I'd like to know I was stark staring mad. It would be happier for me. Far, far happier.' 'If you don't tell me this minute what is the matter, I shall turn on my heel and tramp my way home again,' I said, half in a passion, for what I thought his folly angered me. 'Come into the house,' he entreated, 'and try to have patience with me, for indeed, Mr. Morrison, I am sorely troubled. I have been through my deep waters, and they have gone clear over my head.' We went into his little study and sat down. For a while he remained silent, his head resting upon his hand, struggling with some strong emotion, but after about 5 minutes he asked in a low, subdued voice, 'Do you believe in dreams?' 'What has my belief to do with the matter in hand?' I inquired. 'It is a dream, an awful dream that is troubling me.' I rose from my chair. 'Do you mean to say,' I asked, 'you have brought me from my business and my parish to tell me you have had a bad dream?' 'That is just what I do mean to say,' he answered. 'At least, it was not a dream. It was a vision. No, I don't mean a vision. I can't tell you what it was. But nothing I ever went through in actual life was half so real. And I've bound myself to go through it all again. There is no hope for me, Mr. Morrison. I sit before you a lost creature, the most miserable man on the face of the whole earth.' 'What did you dream?' I inquired. A dreadful fit of trembling again seized him, but at last he managed to say, I've been like this ever since, and I shall be like this forevermore till the end comes.' 'When did you have your bad dream?' I asked. 'Last night, or rather this morning,' he answered. 'I'll tell you all about it in a minute.' And he covered his face with his hands again. 'I was as well when I went to bed about 11 o'clock as ever I was in my life,' he began, putting a great restraint upon himself, as I could see by the nervous way he kept knotting and unknotting his fingers. 'I'd been considering my sermon, and felt satisfied I should be able to deliver a good one next Sunday morning. I had taken nothing after my tea, and I lay down in my bed feeling at peace with all mankind, satisfied with my lot, thankful for the many blessings vouchsafed to me. How long I slept, or what I dreamt about at first, if I dreamt at all, I don't know. But after a time the mists seemed to clear from before my eyes, to roll away like clouds from a mountain summit, and I found myself walking on a beautiful summer's evening beside the river Deldy. He paused for a moment, and an irrepressible shudder shook his frame. "Go on," I said, for I felt afraid of his breaking down again. He looked at me pitifully, with a hungry entreaty in his weary eyes, and continued. It was a lovely evening. I never thought the earth so beautiful before. A gentle breeze just touched my cheek. The water flowed on clear and bright. The mountains in the distance looked bright and glowing. Covered with purple heather, I walked on, till I came to that point where, as you may perhaps remember, the path, growing very narrow, winds round the base of a great crag, and leads the wayfarer suddenly into a little green amphitheater, bounded on one side by the river and on the other by rocks that rise in places sheer to a height of 100 feet or more. I remember it, I said. A little farther on, 3 streams meet and fall with a tremendous roar into the witch's cauldron. A fine sight in the winter-time, only that there is scarce any reaching it from below, as the path you mentioned and the little green oasis are mostly covered with water. I had not been there before since I was a child, he went on mournfully, but I recollected it as one of the most solitary spots possible, and my astonishment was great to see a man standing in the pathway, with a drawn sword in his hand. He did not stir as I drew near, so I stepped aside on the grass. Instantly he barred my way. "You can't pass here," he said. "Why not?" I asked. "Because I say so," he answered. "And who are you that say so?" I inquired, looking full at him. He was like a god. Majesty and power were written on every feature, were expressed in every gesture. But oh, the awful scorn of his smile, the contempt with which he regarded me. The beams of the setting sun fell full upon him, and seemed to bring out, as in letters of fire, the wickedness and hate and sin that underlay the glorious and terrible beauty of his face. I felt afraid, but I managed to say, "Stand out of my way. The river brink is as free to me as to you." "Not this part of it," he answered. "This place belongs to me." Very well, I agreed, for I did not want to stand there bandying words with him, and a sudden darkness seemed to be falling around. "It is getting late, so I'll even turn back." He gave a laugh the like of which never fell on human ear before, and made reply, "Ha ha! You can't turn back. Of your own free will you have come on my ground, and from it there is no return." I did not speak. I only just looked round, and made as fast as I could for the path at the foot of the crag. He did not pass me, yet before I could reach the point I desired, he stood barring my progress, with the scornful smile still on his lips, and his gigantic form assuming tremendous proportions in the narrow way. "Let me pass," I entreated, "and I will never come here again, never trespass more on your ground." "No, you shall not pass." "Who are you that take such power on yourself?" I asked. "Come closer, and I will tell you," he said. I drew a step nearer, and he spoke one word. I had never heard it before, but by some extraordinary intuition, I knew what it meant. He was the Evil One. The name seemed to be taken up by the echoes and repeated from rock to rock and crag to crag. The whole air seemed full of that one word, and then a great horror of darkness came about us. Only the place where we stood remained light. We occupied a small circle, walled round with the thick blackness of night. "You must come with me." I refused, and then he threatened me. I implored and entreated and wept, but at last I agreed to do what he wanted if he would promise to let me return. Again he laughed and said, yes, I should return, and the rocks and trees and mountains, and the very rivers seemed to take up the answer and bear it in sobbing whispers away into the darkness. He stopped and lay back in his chair, shivering like one in an ague fit. "Go on," I repeated again. "'Twas but a dream, you know." "Was it?" he murmured mournfully. "Ah, You have not heard the end of it yet. Let me hear it then, I said. What happened afterwards? The darkness seemed in part to clear away, and we walked side by side across the sward in the tender twilight, straight up to the bare black wall of rock. With the hilt of his sword he struck a heavy blow, and the solid rock opened as though it were a door. We passed through, and it closed behind us with a tremendous clang. Yes, it closed behind us. And at that point he fairly broke down, crying and sobbing as I had never seen a man even in the most frightful grief cry and sob before. The minister paused in his narrative. At that moment there came a most tremendous blast of wind, which shook the windows of the manse, and burst open the hall door and caused the candles to flicker and the fire to go roaring up the chimney. It is not too much to say that, what with the uncanny story and what with the howling storm, we every one felt that creeping sort of uneasiness, which so often seems like the touch of something from another world, a hand stretched across the boundary line of time and eternity, the coldness and mystery of which make the stoutest heart tremble. I am telling you this tale, said Mr. Morrison, resuming his seat after a brief absence to see that the fastenings of the house were properly attended to, exactly as I heard it. I am not adding a word or comment of my own, nor, so far as I know, am I omitting any incident, however trivial. You must draw your own deductions from the facts I put before you. I have no explanation to give or theory to propound. Part of that great and terrible region in which he found himself, my friend went on to tell me, he penetrated, compelled by a power he could not resist, to see the most awful sights, the most frightful sufferings. There was no form of vice that had not there its representative. As they moved along, his companion told him the special sin for which such horrible punishment was being inflicted. Shuddering in immortal agony, he was yet unable to withdraw his eyes from the dreadful spectacle. The atmosphere grew more unendurable, the sights more and more terrible, the cries, groans, blasphemies more awful and heart-rending. "I can bear it no more," he gasped at last. "Let me go." With a mocking laugh, the presence beside him answered this appeal, a laugh which was taken up even by the lost and anguished spirits around. "There is no return," said the pitiless voice. "But you promised," he cried. "You promised me faithfully." "What are promises here?" And the words were as the sound of doom. Still he prayed and entreated. He fell on his knees, and in his agony spoke words that seemed to cause the purpose of the evil one to falter. "You shall go," he said, "on one condition, that you agree to return to me on Wednesday next, or send a substitute." "I could not do that," said my friend. "I could not send any fellow creature here. Better stop myself than do that." "Then stop," said Satan, with the bitterest contempt. And he was turning away when the poor, distracted soul asked for a minute more ere he made his choice. He was in an awful strait. On the one hand, how could he remain himself? On the other, how doom another to such fearful torments? Who could he send? Who would come? And then suddenly there flashed through his mind the thought of an old man to whom it could not signify much whether he took up his abode in this place a few days sooner or a few days later. He was traveling to it as fast as he knew how. He was reprobate of the parish, the sinner without hope successive ministers had striven in vain to reclaim from the error of his ways. A man marked and doomed. Sandy the tinker. Sandy, who was mostly drunk and always godless. Sandy, who it was said believed in nothing and glorified in his infidelity. Sandy, whose soul really did not signify much. He would send him. Lifting his eyes, he saw those of his tormentor surveying him scornfully. "Well, have you made your choice?" he asked. "Yes, I think I can send a substitute," was the hesitating answer. "See you do, then," was the reply. "For if you do not, and fail to return yourself, I shall come for you. Wednesday, remember, before midnight." And with these words ringing in his ears, he was flung violently through the rock, and found himself in the middle of his bedroom floor, as if he had just been kicked there. "That is not the end of the story, is it?" asked one of our party, as the minister came to a full stop and looked earnestly at the fire. "No," he answered, "it is not the end. But before proceeding, I must ask to bear carefully in mind the circumstances already recounted. Specifically remember the date mentioned, Wednesday next, before midnight." "Whatever I thought, and you may think, about my friend's dream," continued the minister, "it made the most remarkable impression upon his mind. He could not shake off its influence. He passed from one state of nervousness to another. It was in vain I entreated him to exert his common sense and call all his strength of mind to his assistance. I might as well have spoken to the wind. He implored me not to leave him, and I agreed to remain. Indeed, to leave him in his then frame of mind would have been an act of the greatest cruelty. He wanted me also to preach in his place on the Sunday ensuing, but this I flatly refused. "If you do not make an effort now," I said, "you will never make it. Rouse yourself, get on with your sermon, and if you buckle to work, you will soon forget all about that foolish dream." Well, to cut a long story short, the sermon was somehow composed and Sunday came, and my friend, a little better in getting over his fret, walked up into the pulpit to preach. He looked dreadfully ill, but I thought the worst was now over, and that he would go on mending. Vain hope! He gave out the text and then looked over the congregation. The first person on whom his eyes lighted was Sandy the tinker. Sandy, who had never before been known to enter a place of worship of any sort. Sandy, whom he had mentally chosen as his substitute, and who was due on the following Wednesday, sitting just below him, quite sober and comparatively clean, waiting with a great show of attention for the opening words of the sermon. With a terrible cry, my friend caught the front of the pulpit, then swayed back and fell down in a fainting fit. He was carried home and a doctor sent for. I said a few words addressed apparently to the congregation, but really to Sandy, for my heart somehow came into my mouth at the sight of him. And then, after I had dismissed the people, I paced slowly back to the manse, almost afraid of what might meet me there. Mr. Cawley was not dead, but he was in the most dreadful state of physical exhaustion and mental agitation. It was dreadful to hear him. How could he go himself? How could he send Sandy, poor old Sandy, whose soul, in the sight of God, was just as precious as his own? His whole cry was for us to deliver him from the evil one, to save him from committing a sin which would render him a wretched man for life. He counted the hours and the minutes before he must return to that horrible place. "I can't send Sandy," he would moan. "I cannot. Oh, I cannot save myself at such a price." And then he would cover his face with the bedclothes, only to start up and wildly entreat me not to leave him, to stand between the enemy and himself, to save him, or, if that were impossible, to give him courage to do what was right. "If this continues," said the doctor, "Wednesday will find him either dead or a raving lunatic." We talked the matter over, the doctor and I, in the gloaming, and we walked to and fro in the meadow behind the manse, and we decided, having to make our choice of two evils, to risk giving him such an opiate as should carry him over the dreaded interval. We knew it was a perilous thing to do with one in his condition, but as I said before, we could only take the least of two evils. What we dreaded most was his waking before the time expired, so I kept watch beside him. He lay like one dead through the whole of Tuesday night and Wednesday evening. 8, 9, 10, 11 o'clock came and passed. 12. "God be thanked," I said, as I stooped over him and heard he was breathing quietly. "He will do now, I hope," said the doctor, who had come in just before midnight. "You will stay with him till he wakes?" I promised that I would, and in the beautiful dawn of a summer's morning he opened his eyes and smiled. He had no recollection then of what had occurred. He was as weak as an infant, and when I bade him try to go to sleep again, turned on his pillow and sank to rest once more. Worn out with watching, I stepped softly from the room and passed into the fresh, sweet air. I strolled down to the garden gate and stood looking at the great mountains and the fair country, and the Deldy wandering like a silver thread through the green fields below. All at once, my attention was attracted by a group of people coming slowly along the road leading from the hills. I could not at first see that in their midst something was being borne on men's shoulders, but when at last I made this out, I hurried to meet them and learn what was the matter. "Has there been an accident?" I asked as I drew near. They stopped and one man came towards me. "Aye," he said, "the worst accident that could have befall him. Poor fella, he's dead." "Who is it?" I asked, pressing forward, and lifting the cloth they had flung over his face, I saw Sandy the tinker. "He had been foe coming home, I take it," remarked one who stood by. "Poor Sandy, and good over the cliff afore he could save hisself. We found him just on this side of the witch's cauldron, where there's a bonny strip of green turf, and his cuddy was feeding on the hilltop with the bit cart behind her." There was a silence for a moment. Then one of the ladies said softly, "Poor Sandy." "And what became of Mr. Cawley?" asked another. "He gave up his parish and went abroad as a missionary. He is still living." "What a most extraordinary story," I remarked. "Yes, I think so," said the minister. "If you'd like to go round by Den Deldy tomorrow, my son, who now occupies the manse, would show you the scene of the occurrence." The next day we all stood looking at the bonny strip of green at the frowning cliffs, and at the Deldy, swollen by recent rains, rushing on its way. The youngest of the party went up to the rock and knocked upon it loudly with his cane. "Oh, don't do that, pray," cried both the ladies, nervously. The spirit of the weird story still brooded over us. "What do you think of the coincidence, Jack?" I inquired of my friend, as we talked apart from the others. "Ask me when we get back to Fleet Street," he answered. Dispatches from the Bountings Valley. In the early morning hours before the sun breaches the horizon, dark waves crash to the shore, bringing with them small crustaceans and other denizens of the deep. The sea also brings the foam man, bringing his mournful song to the beach. The sea foam constitutes his being, first feet, then legs, then arms, one shorter than the other. As his lungs breathe the salty air, he sighs and begins to sing. "Trouble, dear Molly, follows me each day, since you died in the valley and they took me away." He steps along the sand, leaving wet imprints behind, gradually diminishing in size as he stalks. He never makes it to the reeds separating the beach from the parkway, always melting away, leaving a waxy substance not unlike ambergris in his wake. No one is awake at these early hours to see his shrinking shadow and hear his song of woe. There is a house on Murntock Street, shutters gray with age, blue paint cracked and weathered. The door is red, the knob of the door copper and unlocked. Turn and push, and the hinges sing a sad song of neglect echoing in the gloom. The ceiling is covered with a greenish-brown moss that over the years has dripped into a fetid pile in front of the stairs. At the landing stands the apparition of the previous owner, Jonathan Holston, neck still livid from the noose that hangs like a tie over his nude, suppurating chest. He is pointing at nothing that can be seen by human eyes, limited in their faculty for picking up the spectral. But as you read this, you can't help but feel a prick of cold in your lungs, making you cough. The air feels heavier now, pressing down on you and making you slump in your chair. You then hear a voice from somewhere, a heavy, stuttering New England accent that tells you how it is trapped within a cocoon of suffering he had hoped to escape by his suicide. But it didn't work, and now he is metamorphosing into something else. Not a phantom or other supernatural entity, but something more substantial and complex, something that wants to hurt you, its prisoner. You stop consciously reading, but these words continue to run in your mind as you move to leave the room. Curiously, there is a red door in the wall where there was no door before. You go to open it, but it won't turn. The knob is soft like clay in your hand, staining it with rust. You look around and it is the only way out. The window is too small to fit through. You awaken sometime later. There is no clock and you wore no watch, but you sense a passage of not insignificant time. The door is no longer on the wall but on the floor. You kick at it and struggle with the knob, but the door still doesn't open. The room has also become larger, with a staircase and a figure in silhouette at its apex, pointing at you with a dark hand. You go up the staircase and awaken sometime later at its base. You don't remember how you got here, and you don't know how you'll get out. The door now hangs slightly askew against the window. It still won't budge, and now both hands and your forearms have taken on a maroon stain. You shout for help, but no one hears you, because you're alone in this house, in this room. More time passes, and you become aware of a chaos of detritus about you. The staircase is gone, and so is the figure that was standing upon it. There are bicycle bells, frayed rope, sea creature bones, bird beaks of various sizes, newspapers yellowed and aged, dried paintbrushes, a smoldering candle that releases a scent like lavender and honey, writing that is not in your native language describing a spirit that points at you with a baleful stare, a pile of decaying skin, jacks, tarpaulin that is covered in a brownish-green moss, broken exit signs from old movie theaters, a plate of still hot spaghetti from Sonetto that screams at you to wake up. It smells like garlic, basil, and roasted tomatoes at Sonetto, the Italian restaurant that is open 3 days a week in downtown Vorbred. They've operated for 34 years and are fairly popular with a more elderly, affluent crowd. It was founded by Joseph Grigoni and is now managed by his son Anthony. They make all of their pasta and sauce fresh every day, giving what is left at closing to a homeless shelter a few blocks down. You would be forgiven the mistake of thinking the stains on the carpet are from clumsy waitstaff spilling plates, but they are blood stains from a mob war that took place decades ago. The Grigoni family is one of 3 crime syndicates that operate in Vorbred, the others being the Rufio and the Glissandi. The Glissandi family controls several seedy bookstores and strip clubs, while the Rufio clan keeps a steady stream of cocaine, heroin, and methamphetamines flowing into the Bountings Valley. In 1984, a new gang calling themselves the Dark Smile began to infect the valley like a virus. They sought control over all the vices, and it started off small, selling pills on empty street corners and shadowy alleyways. Soon this escalated into more exotic pharmaceuticals, synthesized and produced in backwater nations where life was even less valuable than in the valley. One of these, a microvirion, would go on to have wide-ranging effects on the whole of mankind decades in the future. In the stepped-on form found on the streets, it only would have hallucinogenic properties, making the user feel as though they were a blooming rose dripping petals as they walked. As these users would stumble and then pass out drooling in the alleyways, the Grigonis became perturbed at its negative impact on food traffic around Sonetto. A summit was called, where the matriarch of the family tainted the sauce with the slightly bitter and extremely poisonous Ylipa root. Minutes after the first bites of the dish were consumed by representatives of the Dark Smile, faces went pale, then orange, then red, then purple, then black, and finally dead as the root liquefied their insides. Organ meat, red and juicy, pushed up and out of them, fountaining gore across the floor. Mute Tommy, a fixer for the family, scooped what could be scooped into black boxes, which were wrapped in livid blue bows and affixed with notes inviting the dark Smile to visit other regions and warning them that far worse awaited them if they ever did return to Bountings Valley. A stringed lute with a painting of a nude woman on the fretboard, 200 ants with horns like beetles, a rotten piece of lemon, leaves hued with colors unnatural that hurt to look at, the reclining form of a large woman named Molly. You somehow know who this is, even though you haven't known anyone named Molly, who was killed by Jonathan Holston 84 years ago today. A skein of placenta root that pulses uneasily along with your heartbeat. A quilt your mother made you as a youth stained with blood and vomit. Twin cats that blink and purr at you simultaneously. Red, green, and black wires tied together into something vaguely evil and occult that makes you sweat. Half a bottle of overproof rum. Your hands, dozens of them, even though they are still on your arms. Tarot cards painted by a familiar of the undead Patricia Highsmith. A spring that slowly walks around in ever-widening circles. All of these and many other things indescribable and sad and horrible in 1,000 shades of pink have buried you to your succulent sweet thighs. You begin the work of moving through, now desperately seeking escape. The ceiling laughs at your pitiful progress. You begin to dig down to reach the floor. Impossibly more items begin to flow and bubble up. You're crying with despair at your circumstance. The room is vast and you can't see the walls. You can't see the window. You can't see the laughing ceiling. You can't see the goddamn floor. Finally, uncountable hours later, you see a familiar shade of red, and your pace quickens to clear the debris from it. Below you, revealed, is the same red door with the same copper knob. You grasp it in your hand, say a silent prayer, and give it a turn. There is a loud click that echoes for several years. The latch releases, the hinges sing welcome, and you step inside. And now I bid you a restless night. May you cower in the corner until morning's light. And in the harsh daylight you will see no one really gets out of jail free. Thank you for listening to the Get Out of Jail Free Radio Hour. The Get Out of Jail Free Radio Hour was written, produced, edited, and uploaded by Matt Henshaw, except as indicated.